Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to tackle one of the most sprawling, absolutely crucial, and, let's face it, frequently tested geography topics out there, the Indian River System. Now, if you just look at the raw data, there are over 77 major rivers and tributaries in India. Trying to memorize all of those individually? Yeah, that's a total nightmare, so we're definitely not doing that. Instead, we're going to use a compare and conquer approach. By grouping these massive waterways into logical, contrasting buckets, we'll practically hardwire them into your memory. Let's dive right in. Here's our game plan for today. We'll start with the major river systems, move on to the Himalayan giants, then explore the sacred Ganga Basin. After that, we'll look at the east-flowing peninsular rivers, followed by the west-flowing exceptions, and wrap it all up with some high-yield final exam takeaways. All right, Section 1, India's major river systems. Take a second and just look at the sheer density of this network. It literally stretches all the way from the snowy peaks of Kashmir right down to the tropical coasts of Tamil Nadu. This isn't just a random splash of blue lines across a map. It's the actual lifeblood of the subcontinent, and its flow is dictated entirely by the elevation and the slopes of the Indian landmass. To really wrap our heads around it, we need to split this giant web into two distinct families. On one side, you've got the Himalayan rivers up in the north. Now, these are youthful, perennial, and primarily glacier-fed. That means they're flowing all year round thanks to all that melting snow and ice. On the flip side, you have the peninsular rivers, down south. These run across the much older Deccan Plateau, and they are strictly rain-fed. Because of that, they're seasonal. They swell up massively during the monsoons, but can literally dry down to a trickle during the peak summer. Definitely keep this core contrast in mind, because it's the key to understanding how every single river we're going to talk about behaves. Moving on to Section 2, the Himalayan giants. Think about the geographical irony of these two absolute giants, the Indus and the Brahmaputra. Both of these massive rivers share an origin point high up in Tibet, super close to Lake Manasarovar. But you know what? The exact moment they're born, they completely turn their backs on each other. The Indus flows boldly west toward the Arabian Sea, running about 700 kilometers through India's Jammu and Kashmir region. Meanwhile, the Brahmaputra heads east, flowing parallel to the Himalayas before finally hooking down into India. Actually, the Brahmaputra has this fascinating identity crisis going on. It doesn't even start off with that name. Up in Tibet, it's called the Tsangpo. Up there, it carries a lot less water and almost no silt because, well, it's a cold, dry region. But then it hits the mountain peak of Namcha Barwa, takes a sharp U-turn, and just crashes into Arunachal Pradesh, where it's called the Dihang River. By the time it reaches Assam, the heavy Indian monsoon rains completely transform it. It swells massively in volume, picks up tons of silt, and officially becomes the highly braided, super dynamic, and occasionally destructive Brahmaputra. All right, Section 3, let's talk about the sacred Ganga Basin. So, there's a really common misconception out there that the Ganges just kind of pops out of a glacier fully formed. In reality, its birth is this grand, complex collaboration. It's the result of several turbulent mountain streams coming together at very specific holy confluences, which are collectively known as the Panch Prayag. Since this is prime bait for geography exams, let's break this down step by step. Picture the Alaknanda River as the main spine. As it flows down, it gets joined by the Doli Ganga at Vishnu Prayag, then the Nandakini at Nanda Prayag, the Pindar at Karna Prayag, and the Mandakini at Rudra Prayag. But the absolute crucial point you need to remember is step 5, Dev Prayag. This is where the Alaknanda finally merges with the Bhagirathi River, which, by the way, originated from the Gangotri Glacier. Only from this specific meeting point onwards does the water officially get the name Ganga. Of course, you really can't talk about the Ganga without mentioning its ultimate sidekick, the Yamuna. The Yamuna is the Ganges' largest tributary, kicking things off at the Yamunotri Glacier. As it travels, it gathers its own massive tributaries, rivers like the Chambal and Betwa, and most notably, the Tones, which is actually the Yamuna's largest tributary. They all travel together until the Yamuna finally meets the Ganga at Allahabad. That spot is famously known as the Triveni Sangam. If you're taking notes for an exam, star that meeting point. It is critical to remember. Section 4, East-Flowing Peninsular Rivers. Okay, I want to signal right now that this specific terminology is pure trivia gold that you absolutely need to lock in. The terms Dakshin Ganga, which means South Ganga, or Ridh Ganga, meaning Old Ganga, are vital. In pretty much all academic contexts, this title is awarded to the Godavari River. Why? Because of its sheer length, its age, and its massive cultural significance in the south. Sometimes you'll see it applied to the Kaveri as well, but generally speaking, when you hear Dakshin Ganga, you should immediately think Godavari. And the sheer scale of the Godavari is exactly why it earns that title. While the Ganga is obviously the undisputed champion of India at 2,500 kilometers, the Godavari is India's second longest river overall, stretching an incredibly impressive 1,465 kilometers. The Krishna River is right on its heels at 1,400 kilometers. Guys, these aren't just little streams. They are massive river basins that completely dominate the southern half of the country. So beyond the Godavari, let's just briefly run through the other major east-flowing players. First up, you have the Krishna, which rises in Mahabaleshwar and is fed by its massive tributary, the Tungabhadra. Further south, there's the Kaveri, rising at Talakaveri in the Western Ghats. This is a river that literally supported the rise and fall of ancient kingdoms and is still sustaining modern megacities today. And finally, the Mahanadi. It rises in the central Satpura range and is famous for housing the gigantic Hirakud Dam. Notice a trend here. They all originate in the west or the center, and they all flow east into the Bay of Bengal. Which brings us to Section 5, the west-flowing exceptions. Ask yourself this. If the entire Deccan Plateau naturally slopes from west to east, which, as we just saw, is exactly why the Godavari, Krishna, and Kaveri all flow into the Bay of Bengal, then what's the deal with the rivers that flow west? How do they even exist? This little geographic plot twist is exactly why these specific rivers are a favorite trick question for examiners. Out of all the major peninsular rivers, only this very exclusive trio runs contrary to the eastward trend. We're talking about the Narmada, the Tapi, which is also known as the Tapti, and the Mahi. Instead of following the slope, they cut through rift valleys, essentially flowing backwards against the general slope of the plateau. They travel from east to west until they empty right into the Arabian Sea via the Gulf of Cambay. If you remember literally nothing else about the peninsular rivers, remember this rebel trio. And without a doubt, the undisputed leader of these west-flowing anomalies is the Narmada. It is 1,315 kilometers long, bursting straight out of the Amarkantak Hill in Madhya Pradesh. But what makes the Narmada truly special isn't just its direction. It's the cultural and historical weight it carries. Geographically speaking, the Narmada literally outlines the traditional frontier between North India and South India. It acts as the grand dividing line of the entire subcontinent. And finally, Section 6, Final Exam Takeaways. Let's synthesize everything we've talked about into a rapid-fire review so you can lock in your attention. Ready? Longest river? Ganga, at 2,525 kilometers. The trick west-flowing rivers? Narmada, Tapi, and Mahi. The Dakshin Ganga? That's the Godavari. What do the Tibetans call the Brahmaputra before it gets to India? The Songpo. And where do the mighty Indus and Brahmaputra both begin? Right near Lake Mansarovar. Mastering just this single cheat sheet solves dozens of geographic trivia questions for sure. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. We often study these rivers as, just static blue lines on a map or data points we have to memorize for a test. But how do these ancient, sprawling river systems continue to actively dictate modern India's agriculture, its fiercely debated state borders, and even the survival of its rapidly growing megacities today? The geography we just explored isn't just dusty history. It's literally the active blueprint of India's future. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next one.